Okay, we will be taking questions, so let's start some discussion. I'm sure there'll be a lot of interest.
I have one question for David Scott. During your presentation, you have shown one twisted building with the 3 wings, with the solid central core and 3 columns supporting the floor plate, red column leading in and blue column leading out. My question is that how did you address the issue of differential shortening between the core and the outer column?
The differential shortening in that building would be no different to any other building. You simply have to look at the difference in loading to your detailed analysis. So we didn't think that would be an issue.
I'm a student at IIT, and in all of the presentations that we've seen so far, each of the twisted towers have some sort of vertical shaft through the middle of them. And I'm assuming that that's basically for your elevator and then for your structural support. My question is elevator technology catching up with the twisted tower technology? Are we seeing elevators that will be able to conform to that shape so that you can pull away from that central vertical core?
Well, I'm sure that there are elevator technology experts, but again, I emphasize that it's important to work in the context given. For many years when I was an architect, I just drew for buildings that, and after a while you realize that you can draw almost anything, but it won't get built. So how do you draw something that is interesting, that can be built? And I think that requires some sort of balance between what is possible technologically, what is also profitable to build, but at the same time what is interesting to build and what breaks new ground in a building, in a city, on a particular site that is important that you're dealing with.
My question goes to saying about the technically feasible. With Sierra Milano, the spine, the core seems to rise out of the back. Was that what you always had in mind, or did you want a building that was simply going to curve and you had to put that in?
Well, I always imagined that in order to have a very interesting curve in space, you need some sort of datum for it. From the very beginning, I thought that there is some sort of relationship between the vertical and the curve. I think it's true for any dome, because I think the success of any dome structure depends on the fact that it is resting on a reference datum, which is not like the dome. So, and of course, from the very beginning, we worked on the stability of the building, but also on a different part of the building. And I think there is a possibility, and we are developing that core to be a very interesting place, actually, architecturally, because from various parts of the city, particularly from the northern regions, you will see the building in composition, which is a composition between a kind of a very slender tower and a curve, and the play of light both during the day and night. I think will make it a very special view that people will have from different neighborhoods, and it's a very high density. The tower can be seen from long distance.
I have another question about the core, right here. The elevators are always a critical path of delivery for the completion of your Milan building. I'm curious, is the core concrete or steel frame? And then I would think the contractor has a fabulous opportunity to deliver those elevators earlier than the finishes in the building. I wonder if there's an approach to either of those.
The preliminary design that we've done at the moment assumes that it's going to be a concrete core and a steel frame. And as you say, there is the ability to slip the core and build it faster in advance of the rest of the frame to give you early access to the elevators. The detailed scheduling is being developed at the moment, and so the design is underway. And the core was always envisaged in the competition from a vertical transportation point of view, and as Daniel says, composition.
And I think it's also important, if I might add, that because the building is curved, coming from a vertical core will be very spectacular because you're in a vertical movement. Each floor you are on a curve. You're looking at Milan, at the park, and farther away from a curved position. I think there is a relationship between how you enter the space, whether it's an office or it's a hotel, whatever it will be, and how you view then what the stage on which you sit. And it's very difficult to simulate, although I'm sure we have done many of these simulations, how different each of these views really is. Even between floor 13 and 14, there's quite a dramatic shift because of the curve and because of the light. And I think that's part of that relationship between the core, which I think it has its own elegance and its own drama when it's juxtaposed with that oblique double curved surface.
My question is about Fiera Milan. What was your original reaction to the two adjacent buildings by Zaha Hadid and Murata Sasaki? Do they correspond to your original conception of them when you first created the urban plan for Fiera Milan?
They do. Certainly in terms of their architecture, they're unique buildings, and they are unique creations by those two architects. But in terms of the positioning of the plaza, in terms of framing the plaza, and I think it's framed in a very interesting way because even though it is in some way a very classical space, centered on the park with the green and the open space around it, it has a very sophisticated series of interpretations seen from the different views that are accessible towards those buildings. So certainly the position of the buildings, their forms came later, but their heights were given from the very beginning as part of that plan. Their forms were not.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
Well, I was actually going to ask a question. Am I allowed to? Daniel, I just wanted to ask you, we've seen some fantastic skyscraper forms yesterday and today, and you've showed us some fantastic skyscraper forms as well. I'm sure that all these skyscrapers will become synonymous with the place in which they're set. Pretty much like the Sydney Opera House is synonymous with Australia, often used as the symbol to represent Australia. But I just wonder, many of the kind of sculptural approaches to the tall buildings that we've seen yesterday, today, and perhaps some of your own, seem to allow the transport of the model across cities in the world, i.e. the relationship between the architecture and the city is a visual sculptural one. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that that is a bad thing, but whilst it exists on that level, that means that it could be transported to other cities around the world as a piece of sculpture. That in itself may not be a bad thing, but what I'm slightly concerned with is if you look at the traditions of vernacular architecture and how that grows out of a local culture, local climate, local culture, local customs, is the superimposition of skyscraper forms on cities around the world creating a homogeneous mush of urban centres?
It's a great question, and as I alluded in my presentation, it's easy enough to create an interesting form. It is, with technology, when we have young architects from all over the world who are able to create spectacular, and these forms can actually be built. But that is, to me personally, not too much of an interest. To me, the interest is how do you create a form that not just works pragmatically for your client, but that has a relationship to its genius loci. Of course, it is sculptural in its elements and could be taken out of its context, just the way a medieval sculpture has been taken away from a Gothic treasure put in a museum, somewhere else. But actually, to create a building that belongs in a place, as unexpected as it might be, and it might be very unexpected because a building like that doesn't really exist before. It's something new. But it has to pick up on local traditions that are not that obvious. For example, the Milan Tower also refers to the Duomo in Milan. With its two companions, if you really, if I was able to show you the analysis, it actually refers to the construction of the triangular composition that was discussed by mathematicians of the 15th century in Milan. So, and it has many other references to Milan in its even Gothic sense. So again, each form has to, I think, at least I try, each form does really, and even a project such as the one in Korea or in Warsaw does have very local elements to it. They might not be very obvious. Now, sure, you're right. If you just transpose these as pure sculptural works, they could lose their meaning. But I don't think any one of them is interchangeable. And I at least attempt. We have at least 25 other, skyscrapers in our office. But I assure you that though they might use certain vocabulary of geometries, which I like, each one is very, very different, and each one responds to a local context. And I think that's important because otherwise, in a short time, it would become very boring.
This is the last question, I'm sure. And when you're explaining your power in Milan, you talked about the importance of having the core as sort of a datum to the curvature of the building. But what I also found interesting is how much you talked about the context of the city. And in many of your projects, you have a very traditional sort of city form that sort of highlights the event created by your projects. So my question is, how do you then turn around your thinking and then create a city from the language you're creating, sort of the event of your project?
Can you repeat the last part? How do you create a city?
Yes, how does what you do sort of expand and create a fabric of a city? And that's just sort of taking, sort of looking at the reverse. You have traditional cities and you have events from your projects. How does your architecture then create sort of larger connections if you were to expand upon these projects?
And we're working on a very large urban plan in Copenhagen, which extends the center of Copenhagen out, and we want to complete it for a master plan, and we're also building some buildings in it. So, of course, the question of how does architecture contribute to cities is important, but I do believe that cities need a pluralistic architecture. They need kind of a variety and difference. I don't think there is a danger of sort of chaos, as people say. No more chaos than is created by the black boxes that I showed. And in fact, if you think of architecture not as just an architecture aesthetic game, but as kind of evolutionary art. In the evolution, never mind intelligent design, in evolution, things get more complex. The functions become adaptable to many more levels between the amoeba, one-celled organism, and a chicken, and a human being. So again, I think evolving the notion of a city is also part of the task of architecture, and I think there is in my mind no danger in doing it, because as Marcel Duchamp, the great theoretician and great artist of the 20th century, said, what is architecture? He said, it is a piece of sculpture with plumbing in it. And you can say that the city is a work of art, composed of people's dreams that have been realized over time. The Tower of Pisa is equally modern, actually, to anything being built today. So I see this as part of a democratic process, and I think if it's genuine democracy, it will produce genuinely vital architecture rather than just an imitation or a nostalgia imported from somewhere else. And that's, I think, why democracy is important, not just in general, but to allow architecture to grow in ways that connect to people. And in my experience at Ground Zero, I would say I'm very moved by the fact, never mind that the people like what is happening or don't like it, maybe everybody has an opinion on it, but the fact that everyone is involved in the desire to create something that is befitting Ground Zero. I think that's a huge statement to the world, that people are no longer willing to sit back and let just planners, in the old-fashioned way, decide the fate of cities, that every individual must be given an access to act creatively. And I think that's Good.
Okay, thank you everyone, and thank you very much, Daniel, on behalf of the council. You have given us a great talk.